Chris Whalen CPA is here to talk about all things financial. We're going to start with U.S. July federal deficit grows. This is from Reuters. The U.S. government recorded a $244 billion budget deficit for July, up 10% from a year earlier, but accounting for calendar differences, the gap would have been $45 billion narrower, the Treasury Department said on Monday, which I'm guessing is them saying it's not as bad as it seems. It's not as bad as it seems. And then if you scroll down towards like the middle of the article, they happen to mention the really bad news, which is that federal debt service costs continue to rise. Interest on the debt was up 21%, and that's in 1 month, in July, to $89 billion. And the weighted average interest rate was up 49 basis points to 3.33%, a Treasury official said. So maybe my first question for you, Chris, what's worse news, the deficit or the interest on debt?
They're equally as bad, and one comes from the other, right? We don't take in enough tax to the IRS to finance our bloated spending in the country, so we have to find money by either printing it or borrowing it. And of course, the more that we borrow, that keeps going up, the more interest we pay on a regular basis. It's as if we took out another credit card at home, our interest is going to go up on commensurate. So it's very straightforward. I mean, the amount of debt we have is astronomical at this time. I don't know how we're ever going to pay it.
When you hear that we spend more on interest on the deficit, on the debt, than we do on national defense or Medicare, it's second only, I think, now to Social Security. And it looks like even during the Trump administration, like it really started to climb. The news likes to say that the Trump tax cuts are the reasons why. I don't know what your opinion is on that, but it seems like the last 8 years have not been good for national debt. Why?
Well, because they're overspending, and they won't rein in their spending. It's that
What are
simple.
we
Trump
spending
was,
the
I mean,
most money on? Well, I mean, I guess
well,
defense. Wars.
can I share my
Yeah.
screen?
Yep. Go ahead.
All right, 1 second.
Yeah, because well, I guess if our other spending is Medicare and defense, that answers my question, right? Because the defense budget is the next under paying off interest, which is just under Social Security. So Medicare, Social Security, those old people, and then wars. That's what we're spending all our money on.
Show you.
Here we go. Here's Chris's pie chart. Take it
All right, so
away,
this
Chris.
shows for 2024. If you see that well, let me just go up a little bit. The interest on the budget is 11.4% of our total spending. So imagine in your household, you're spending that on interest alone. If we look here, we have our total amount that we're going to spend is 6.9 trillion. And this shows you the defense is actually estimated to be a little bit more, 885. Net interest is almost 800 billion. Medicare, Social Security still by far outweighs all of them or beats them all. And the non-defense discretionary is the second largest. It's very interesting. So we have other mandatory. So if we look at this, those two sections is what people don't focus on. There's a lot of things in this 1335 here, other mandatory and non-defense discretionary, that are earmarked, that are pork barrel spending. So the most important thing that we need to do is balance the budget, as Ross Perot many years ago wanted to do. And so this gives everyone a good idea of where your money is going. Every time you pay a tax dollar, you're paying off this interest to go to um, welfare and other social programs, and defense is the biggest one. So we should be able to knock our defense spending down. I don't know why we need to spend that much money on defense when we're already the number one in the world. But this gives everyone a good idea of where the money's going as a percentage.
Mm-hmm. All right. In a second, I'm going to ask Chris why we should even care. Because if I do have friends from graduate school who say spending is what the government does, and spending is a good business to be in, and it has really no effect on the average American. So we're going to talk about that. And another article that basically said the majority of Americans incorrectly think that we're in a recession because we're all squeezed tight. Not all of us, I guess, but a lot of us going to the grocery store, and cost of living just seems like As of late, it's gotten worse, but we're gonna ask Chris about that in a second. If you are a wine drinker because you're either celebrating the record-setting debt in the United States and you think that's awesome, or you're mourning the fact that the country could potentially going down the toilet because of debt. Either way, we have a great bottle of wine for you. These are all amazing wines from really unique and remote parts of the world, from Argentina, Chile, Italy, Spain, France. Hand harvested grapes, extreme altitude vineyards, generational farming, like the kind of winemaking techniques and grape growing techniques that people did hundreds of years ago, and they've been passing down the legacy from generation to generation. They all come with an amazing story, and they are really, really, really good bottles of wine. If you sign up for the club, which is what it is now, it's a club, you will get 6 bottles of wine every 3 months. This means you will always have an amazing bottle of wine for a gift, for a cocktail party, whatever it is, for the latest news on the national debt. You'll always have one on hand. You're going to have to run down to the Dollar General store, pretend like you bought a nice bottle of wine. They're going to be like, I just saw this at Dollar General for $2.50. You'll have one, and you're going to support free speech at the same time. AlisonWinePromo.com. Okay, so my big question, Chris, is before we even go any farther, why should we even care as the average American about this? It seems like it's just news that hits the headlines and then it just goes away, and nobody seems to combust. Like the United States just keeps going and going. And it, like, when does this ever have an actual consequence for the U.S. government, and why should the average American care?
Well, it's about the value of each dollar that we have. So just to back up a little bit, they've printed so much money. I believe the supply of money was increased 7.5 times from 2008 to 2022, I believe. And so if you think about that, every dollar that's printed is diminishing the value of all the dollars we have, right? We have 7 times the number of dollars. That causes inflation in itself because the dollars are not worth as much. That makes sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why the debt is important is because of that value. So we have a lot of foreign entities, countries, sovereign states that have lent us money, and so we're going to pay them back in dollars. So isn't it in their best interest to keep the dollar afloat as high as possible? So that's one thing where the debt helps the U.S. citizen, because if there was no debt on our books, there's no need for, say, Saudi Arabia to keep the dollar in good standing. But eventually it's going to have to be paid, or we're going to default. I mean,
And then
there's so
what?
much debt out there. We can go bankrupt, and it has no effect on us because the U.S. can do whatever it wants usually. So I think that there's going to be a large amount of defaults from large, from corporations and also governments like us. But having the debt, it costs us a lot of money, but I believe it props up the value of our spending. Imagine if we had more inflation. That's what would happen. It would the value of the dollar would go down. That the same thing happens with the printing of money, and that's going to make us have more inflation. Our dollars buy less.
All right, that leads me into my next topic I'm going to ask you about. In the meantime, though, send me some mail wherever you are. I love getting mail. P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. Look, what somebody drew me. Well, it may have been pre-drawn, but they painted it. See, somebody made me a little painting. Some other folks sent some generous donations. I got a nice long letter here. Let me see, just make sure I'm not putting out any personal information. Okay, so you got a nice long letter. So please send me notes of encouragement, winning lottery tickets, loose pocket change, nothing edible and nothing creepy. The producers do open the mail on the way home. P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. Going over to Locals, which is a great way to support the show too. It's $5 a month, and you get to put in questions ahead of time for interviews. AlisonMorrow.locals.com. There was a question about Social Security too, related to this. A lot of people are concerned, I think, about Social Security, and does this have any connection, I guess, to the debt? How could this impact things? Seth Underwood writes, what about upcoming Social Security crisis? Japan is already facing this problem with its nation, but the U.S. is getting there.
Well, of course, they keep kicking this issue down, this can down the street, but eventually they're going to have to make a cutoff of who can get Social Security because we can't afford it. So maybe they'll say some year that anyone over 55 can now get it, but people under cannot, and come up with a different system for them to put money away for themselves, which would be better in the long run. So Social Security, as you remember, when it was first instituted, there was 10 or 12 people who were paying for one person, and now there's two people paying for one person. So of course that can't be sustained. That's why we have deficits. A big part of our borrowing is Medicare and Social Security because the payroll systems no longer can service the amount of money that's needed for all the elderly, and that's only getting worse. So both of those systems are going to have to change because it's not really that sustainable any longer. For the, I think by 2030 something really has to happen because it's bankrupt already technically if you look at the long term.
Over on Rumble, someone says that the West is heading into an economic wasteland. Do you believe that, Chris? Do you think that it's going to get really, really bad? I mean, the people who have their particular administration in power and control at the time tend to, I think, minimize it. People who don't maximize it, and we just go round and round and round. Actually, I thought this was an interesting article on Yahoo Finance. The US debt is about to hit 35 trillion. It didn't come up at the GOP convention, which is interesting to me. Like, why wouldn't the particular political party trying to get back in control, why wouldn't they talk about it? Is because they've got some dirty secrets there as well.
Well, of
But
course, well, they're just as to blame as the Democrats.
yeah. Yeah,
they're
so
just
are both, if you have both parties to blame for this, and you know, can they just keep playing these games forever, or like the guy says on Rumble, or are we going to crash and burn at some time? I mean, are you a doom and gloomer about that? Do you think eventually it just kind of like slowly bottoms out and then maybe comes back up? Like, what's your
Well, I
prediction
think
there?
we have to separate the debt, and there's a few things about the economic wasteland you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So you really have to take there's two portions of the economy here. We have small to medium sized business and large Fortune 500, 100 companies. So they're going to be suffering the most in the long run, I believe. The small to medium sized areas are doing fantastic now. There's been a lot of brain drain I've seen from the large companies because of their DEI and CRT programs. So I think we have to look at both of them. The large corporations, as I said, what I've seen from my clients that work there are downsizing. They're having a very hard time. They're not hiring based on the person with the most talent, if you know what I'm saying. And that's causing them to have severe customer service issues, productivity issues, and other concerns. So I don't see an economic wasteland. There's always a great energy in my client base, the small to medium sized businesses. So I urge everyone get out of the large companies. They're a sinking Titanic. And of course, no matter if you're a person of color, you should get out of there, or someone who's not of color, because all of that is causing such a problem with the rank and file. And in my world, that doesn't exist. I've never had any racial issue. All of my clients don't care if you're transgender; they just want you to come in and do the work. So there's if you separate it out, the large companies are going to have bigger problems than the small to medium sized ones.
This article from CNBC: 59% of Americans wrongly think the US is in a recession, reports find. Citing higher costs and difficulty making ends meet, 3 in 5 Americans falsely believe the US is currently in a recession. Economists have wrestled with the growing disconnect between how well the economy is doing and how people feel about their financial standing. And some say we're in a vibe session, which I don't even really understand what that means.
Hmm.
But they say down here that they don't really define it. Wealth creation was concentrated amongst homeowners in upper income brackets, but you probably have about 1/3 of the population that's been left out of that. That's why there's such a disconnect. I don't understand vibe session, so I don't know if you can define that for us, but they say the lower income households are not keeping up. Everything looks great, but when you look beneath the surface, the disparity between the wealthy and non-wealthy is widening dramatically. That is somebody Goldman that they've
Well,
quoted.
I
I'm going to
think
go back
I
up.
I think the vibe session is simply a feeling out
Keith Goldman.
period. People aren't. It's a lack of confidence right now, and so when you say we're not in a recession, you have to remember that we've had a slowdown in economic growth and consumer purchasing power due to the interest rates. So that's in home ownership around the country now. Look at all the problems there. Look at all the lack of consumer spending, all because the interest rates are so high. Which I don't necessarily disagree with those interest rates. So I don't think that we have a productivity problem leading to a recessionary problems. I think that just a matter of that money is just so expensive. I think one of your followers had mentioned stagflation. See, the thing about stagflation is that it's based on high inflation, high unemployment, right, and also a lack of growth. But if you look today, you would think unemployment's low, but that's not the same kind of inflation number was 50, 60 years ago because they exclude a lot of people who are no longer looking for work. And I think you need to add another 7 or 8% to that 3.4 or 4.3 number I saw today to say what the real unemployment rate is. Because for them not to include people who suddenly say they're not looking for a job today, that doesn't make any sense. I want to deal with able-bodied adults who are not working right now. And if you take that standard, if you take that as a standard, it's going to be probably closer to 11 or 12%. And so that would say we have stagflation, even though the figures from the government don't bear that out.
Um, you know what? Let's talk about as somebody who is in a world where advertisers are part of the gig economy. I will say I have definitely noticed that they are pulling back. So it affects people like me, even who are not in necessarily like a traditional economy. Then, there are just fewer people. I get emails from folks all the time. They're like, $5 makes a difference. I have to cut my local subscription. For $5 to make a big difference, I mean, that to me says something. So I just don't know how to make a whole lot of sense of what like the media reports are saying. And maybe it's true that we're not in a recession. I mean, we're in a vibe session, as they say, but it seems like it's not. I don't know. Just going to the grocery store the other day, my neighbor was like, something's got to change. I mean, she's totally complaining to me about how something's got to change. People can't take this anymore. They're going to, and I even saw an article about there being unrest, like going into the election, after the election, that the market should get ready for. There's going to be civil unrest. And I don't want to be like Tim Pool or anything right now, but I wonder about that too. Real fast though, if you're somebody who's considering diversifying into precious metals with the very little savings you have left, and I say that as somebody who's struggling just like everybody else, and we're talking today about how we're paying more on interest on the national debt than every other budget item except Social Security. You can support the show and get everything you've ever wanted to know about putting your 401k or IRA into a tax sheltered account in precious metals, gold and silver. You just text Alison to 989898, Alison with one L to 989898. Birch Gold's been in business over 20 years. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They've helped thousands and thousands of customers decide, and you'll get your no obligation free info kit. Decide whether this is right for you and support the show at the same time. Text Alison, ALISON, to 989898.